Hello everyone, welcome to week 4 of EPM 4355, the ISO 14001 Environmental Management Systems class. This week we're going to talk about objectives. And we begin with looking at where we are in our Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle and the clauses of the 14001 standard. We see that we are still focusing for the second week on the planning part of an EMS. So we are learning more about clause 6 and the subclauses. This week we're going to talk about objectives. We're going to look at some definitions that are related to objectives, describe the organizational role of objectives, look at the actual 14001 objectives requirements, and then understand some methods for documenting objectives. To begin with, let's start with what we mean by an objective. An objective is very simply a result to be achieved. An objective can be strategic, tactical, or operational. We'll see in a minute how that fits in an organization. And objectives can relate to different disciplines, financial, health and safety, environmental goals, and can apply at different levels. The strategic, organization-wide, project, product, service, and process. And an objective can also be expressed in other ways, as an intended outcome, a purpose, or operational criterion, as an environmental objective, or by the use of words with similar meaning, a goal or target, an aim. So objective is a pretty flexible term, but think of it really as something that we need to do, something that we need to do that includes a specific result that we have to achieve. An environmental objective is an objective set by the organization that's consistent with its environmental policy. So the only difference between a generic objective and an environmental objective is that we need to achieve certain results based on our environmental policy. It's very simple, very straightforward. What is it that we want to achieve to operationalize the policy? In other words, the policy statement says, is our policy to do this? So how do we make that a reality? Well, we make that a reality by setting some objectives. Environmental performance is very important. This is the area that's been strengthened in the 2015 standard. And performance is defined as performance related to the management of environmental aspects. So environmental performance in an EMS is centered on the drivers of change, the drivers of impacts. That's where we take action, not on end-of-pipe controls, not necessarily on even inputs, not on other parts of the organization, but on the drivers of changes in the environment. This is what makes an EMS so powerful, and this is why the aspects and impacts analysis is really at the heart of an EMS and why it's so important. And so environmental performance within an environmental management system, you can look at results in terms of how well the policy is being achieved, how well the objectives are being achieved, or other criteria using indicators. And an indicator is simply a measurable representation of the condition or status of operations, management, or conditions. Think of an indicator as a temperature scale. The indicator is the degrees, it's marked there on the thermometer, and that's simply an indicator of temperature. Within an EMS, there's multiple indicators, and you can read about these in the guidance in the back of the standard. But it depends on what you are looking at overall in terms of what you're trying to measure. Now, when we come to the measuring and monitoring section, we'll talk a little bit more about indicators. But for right now, let's focus on indicators as they relate to successful achievement of the objectives. Now, environmental performance, this is interesting. Environmental performance does not necessarily relate to the overall external environment. However, the effectiveness of the EMS as a whole relates to the overall environment. So if an EMS is effective, you're going to see a reduction in negative impacts because you're working to take actions relative to the drivers of those impacts, which are the aspects. And so within an environmental management systems, you can measure the results against your your policy objectives or other criteria. How well are you performing? And the other criteria could be specific measures of environmental conditions. Now, the environmental conditions come in when we're looking at indicators. But in terms of the role of objectives, we can see that objectives are really synonymous with goals, and they are also explicit commitments. These are commitments that management makes in order to state what they're going to do, and when it relates back to the policy, it relates back to compliance obligations and the views of interested parties, then you have a why it's important to do it. Objectives are a bridge between a vision and current reality, where we are now and where we want to go. And the measurement of that bridge span is the needed change. That's the activities that need to happen. And so that's the target. In other words, we need to increase the number of people we hire by 25 within 6 weeks. That's, say our vision is to have 200 people employed. We have 175 people employed now. So our gap is 25 people, and the measurement of that bridge span is the needed change. We need to hire 25 people, so that's the objective. Objectives, again, should be supported by measurable and concrete indicators, which are scales, as I said before, just like the temperature scale on a thermometer or a weight scale on something that you're on a balance or something like that, and then a target on each scale. So we want to reduce the external temperature of a particular piece of machinery by 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So it goes down to, say, 60 degrees, from 70 to 60. So that would be an indicator. The scale is the temperature scale, and the target is 60 degrees. And the actual objective then, what we're trying to accomplish, is the 10-degree reduction to hit the target of 60 degrees. Objectives can help gain the personal commitment to an overall organizational purpose, and this is why they serve as motivators, especially when they're linked to policy commitments and they're linked to the external environment, because they give individual managers a linkage to a reason why they're doing something. They're not just doing it because somebody somewhere decided it was a good idea. The objectives are directly traceable to the organization's purposes as expressed in its policies and as expressed in meeting the needs of interested parties and dealing with environmental changes in the external environment. And so when they're measured, they can also serve as an additional source of motivation, because at the end, when an objective is achieved, you can actually measure that achievement and then reward that achievement, depending on what it is. But it is measurable, and so it's definable. It's something that everyone can see. You can get your hands around it. It's not just a sort of an amorphous thing. It sets a concrete path with a defined endpoint. So objectives serve multiple purposes within an organization. Again, we have 3 levels of objectives. At the executive level, the goals tend to be very broad. We want to, like for example, here, let's use our example, reduce energy costs by $250 million annually. At the next level, we might have more specific goals, more specific objectives. For example, if we want to reduce energy costs, we will install energy efficient technologies at all facilities by the end of the year. And then at the supervisory level, which are very specific, and to support that goal, we would replace all lights at facility A with LED bulbs by the end of the year. Now, the risk here is getting into something called management by objectives. That has proven to not be an effective way to run an organization, because you've got systems that tend to proliferate, and you get hundreds and hundreds of objectives. Theoretically, it works, but if you get more than one or two levels of objectives, you've lost touch with what's going on. And so one of the principles of objectives is the fewer the better, and the more clearly they're tied to policy commitments, to interested parties, compliance obligations, and to the organizational context, the better off you are. So if we look at the three terms, the objective, target, and the planning, the objective is what is intended to be accomplished. It's what needs to be done. The target is the measure of accomplishment, and it contains a specific numerical value of an indicator. And then the planning is the set of activities that accomplish the intention. What will be done, what resources are required to do it, who is responsible for making sure it's completed, when will it be completed, how the results will be evaluated. So these are how objectives are managed in any organization, and in EMS it's the same story. It's important to understand that these elements need to be present, and you're going to include these in your final paper for the class. There are three types of indicators you can use. And it's so important to understand that the choice of indicator is just as important as the choice of objective, because the choice of indicator will define your endpoint, or define what needs to be achieved in a way that can be measured. So there are three types. Management performance indicators provide information about management efforts to influence the environmental performance of the organization's operations. Things like management actions, compliance status, training program implementation. Operational performance indicators provide information about the environmental performance of the organization's operations, like inputs and outputs. This would be pounds of waste, things like this. Environmental condition indicators are information about condition of the environment, things like pollution levels, resource levels. So for any one objective, you could have multiple indicators. Generally, you're going to want to have one-to-one correspondence here. If you have too many indicators, you haven't stated your objective clearly enough. But you can have multiple indicators, and we'll go over a couple examples. First example, if we have a service organization, it's located in an area where air quality is bad, it's unsatisfactory. They use air quality information to select the appropriate indicators, because one of its objectives in its EMS is to reduce its motor vehicle emissions. The service organization, this might be a cab company or a delivery company. So an environmental condition indicator might be concentrations in the air of contaminants associated with motor vehicle emissions. An operational performance indicator, this could be multiple, a reduction in motor vehicle emissions from the use of alternative fuels, quantity of total fuels consumption, fuel efficiency for each motor vehicle, frequency of vehicle maintenance, a number of vehicles equipped with environmental control technologies. The management performance indicators could be the amount of money spent promoting public transportation, number of hours of employee training, and the benefits of the use of public transportation, and the effectiveness of efforts to reduce fuel consumption and improve vehicle maintenance and fuel efficiency. And so, in other words, we could roll up some of the operational performance indicators to say, if we achieve these, then we have a management performance indicator that reflects how well the program managers or the division managers have been implementing actions to achieve the goals here that are set out overall, reducing its motor vehicle emissions by these specific actions, reducing fuel consumption, sort of a combined effort here. So we see that for any particular objective, reduce its motor vehicle emissions, we can have three types of indicators. Now, the environmental condition indicators are tough because even though the organization may reduce its motor vehicle emissions, this might not change. The environmental condition indicator might be something that may not be under the direct influence of the organization. However, it's important to include it so that we know what's important. The operational performance indicators and management performance indicators are generally under the control of the organization. So you'll tend to see more of these used with EMS objectives. Here's another example. In the geographical region where environmental information indicates a diminishing water supply, an organization can select indicators related to water conservation measures. The objective is to reduce the consumption of water. And that would just be a path. We just want to reduce our consumption of water. Our environmental condition indicator might be groundwater level and the rate of replenishment. Again, these might not be under the direct influence of an organization. The operational performance indicators, quantity of water used per day and quantity of water used per unit of production. And a management performance indicator might be the amount of money spent on research into methods for reduction of water consumption. So you see, there are different ways to skin a cat. For example, in this case, to reduce water usage, we can include all three of these if we like, and we may not be able to affect completely the environmental condition indicators, but at least we're becoming aware of them. So the requirements for 14,001 are for objectives and planning are pretty straightforward. The organization shall establish environmental objectives at relevance and functions and levels, taking into account, and this is where we put it all together, significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, policy commitments, as well as its risks and opportunities. So this is where in your project you're going to have to sit down with all of the analysis that you did and put it all together to put a set of objectives together. There is no set approach to do this. There's many ways you can achieve this. Because what you're looking at is generating a set of objectives that are consistent with the environmental policy, measurable by using all three types of indicators, or perhaps the most relevant, monitored as part of the ongoing EMS activities, communicated to the people that need to take the action, and then updated based on changes. And then these have to be, objectives have to be documented so that we know that there's evidence of exactly what it is that we're trying to achieve. When we set a group of objectives, it's not enough just to set the objectives down and document them. Again, there are specific parts of this that of the objectives that need to be defined. We have to define what's going to be done, what resources, time, people, equipment, supplies, information, that kind of thing. Who's going to be responsible for accomplishing this, when it's going to be completed, and then how the results will be evaluated. Again, this is indicators. So you can use any of the three indicators that we talked about before. And then it's important from both a business management and an environmental management standpoint to consider how the actions to achieve its environmental objectives can be integrated into the organization's business processes, because this is, again, another impetus for making the EMS part of the way the company does business rather than an add-on or a bolt-on. So you have to be able to demonstrate what did we look at in terms of what else is going on in the organization, and can we combine objectives with other objectives, and can we combine actions with other actions, for example, replacement of machinery, to achieve our environmental objectives. This is a good way to document this, and you're going to be doing this in your final paper. So what we have here is a way of documenting all of the relative actions to this objective. So we have a description of the action to be taken. We link it back to this significant environmental aspect from part 4. We link it back to the policy commitment. We also include some regulatory requirements. We provide at least one indicator, and maybe more. We define what resources are going to be required. The person responsible in the completion date. And this gets you into compliance with the 14,001 requirements. And we do this for all of our objectives. So for your paper for Happy Harry's, you're going to develop a set of these. So that's it for this week's lecture. If you have any questions, ask them in the instructor office threads or send me an email, and we'll see if we can get them answered.